Another year, another Haslab. So today, Hasbro announced their latest Haslab. It's a Marvel one. It's Giant Man. I think a lot of people are interested to see how this goes because last year's Engine of Vengeance failed. And so there's a lot to unpack based on the live stream of the announcement today. For a bit of background, Hasbro has been doing Haslab since 2019. They've had 13 projects, and of the 13 projects, 3 of them have failed. 2 of those were Star Wars, and 1 of them was last year's Marvel's Engine of Vengeance. Prior to that, of the Marvel ones, the Sentinel, which I do have, and the Galactus, which I also have, were obviously successful, and I think they did fairly well with their campaigns. So as a quick rundown of the specs of the Giant Man Haslab, we know it's going to be 24 inches tall. We know that the cost is going to be $200. So far, they've shown us 2 tiers, which are alternate face sculpts, not alternate heads. And that's really it so far. They've not announced any additional tiers or any bonus levels or anything like that. And that's really the gist of what we're getting. They go into more detail about the specifics of articulation and stuff like that. But I think the 2 questions that we really have are, why Giant Man and is it worth it? So as far as why Giant Man, I think the Engine of Vengeance didn't succeed for a couple of reasons, but I think one of them is because while Ghost Rider is a fairly interesting and popular character, I think the version that they chose wasn't one that was nearly as popular as really the original or even the 90s Ghost Rider. On top of that, the project itself, I think, was hamstrung by the additional tiers and the bonus levels. Specifically, I think it failed because when they weren't able to hit the bonus level of, I think it was a civilian body by a certain date of getting a certain number of backers, that's when I think people started pulling out, and basically the entire project failed after that. I think honestly, had they extended that, it would have succeeded just fine. But here we are. To me, I think Giant Man makes a lot of sense because he is an Avenger. Avengers are still very popular with all the movies and MCU stuff happening still. Although since last year, people have been saying that they would really want the X-Men's Blackbird. I don't know if I necessarily disagree with that, but I also think that the Blackbird would be very, very large, especially if you're trying to get one that scales with the 6-inch figures, and that would be far too expensive for even a Haslab. I think that one would probably approach $600+, and I feel like that would be too niche, even for, you know, giant action figures. So besides the Blackbird and Giant Man, I don't know what else I can think of off the top of my head for what would make for a good Marvel Haslab. If you have any ideas, let me know in the comments below. Now let's go on to our second question, which is it worth it? So we know that Giant Man is going to be 24 inches tall. Galactus is 32, and I believe Sentinel is a little bit shorter than that. So at 24 inches tall, I think he's going to come up to around here or so. So he will definitely be shorter, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially when you look at the cost, which was $400 for Galactus. Even though Giant Man isn't half the height of Galactus, he is half the cost. Now, I understand that Galactus also came with additional 6-inch figures, but if you watch the live stream, they actually talk about the Engine of Vengeance failure and how they didn't want to include 6-inch figures as tiers because they didn't want any of the figures to be gate locked from ever being released in the event that the project failed, because they had those very strict requirements that if the project succeeded, the figures would be released, but if it didn't, then we would never get those figures otherwise. And when they were talking about that, they were also kind of hinting that the cost of Giant Man being at $200 was basically because they didn't have additional figures in there. So that leads me to believe that the first 3 Marvel Haslabs all were higher priced specifically because of the additional 6-inch figures that they had. So Galactus, I believe, had 3 additional figures, and again, the total price was $400. If we priced each figure at about $25, then Galactus was actually closer to being about $325. Sentinel was $350. That one had 2 extra figures. So if we priced those at about $25, Sentinel was closer to about $300. And with the Engine of Vengeance, it was 4 figures. I think 5 if you include the bonus one, but let's just go with 4. With 4 figures at about $25 a pop, you're looking at $100, which would have brought the Engine of Vengeance itself to being about $250, which everybody was saying that's what it should have been priced at. So clearly, they are baking the price of the additional figures into the project, even though they're calling them like extra tiers. So I think that means that we really aren't going to be seeing another tier with Giant Man that has a 6-inch figure, which I think is kind of a shame because They really should be including a 6-inch Giant Man. I did tweet at them, but we'll see if they respond. Now, as far as it being $200, I think it's pretty split. I've seen lots of comments of people saying that it's too expensive, it doesn't make any sense, it should be $100. And I've seen other comments say that's reasonably priced. And I'm kind of more leaning towards the being reasonably priced because, like I said, half the cost of Galactus, but not being half the height is pretty nice, because if we went with half the height, we'd be looking at 16 inches rather than 24. And the articulation does look really good. The articulation of Galactus is fine, but I think it is a little hamstrung by like the skirt and some other stuff. But I think at the 24-inch scale, it should be much more in line with the actual 6-inch Marvel Legends figures. Now, as far as the tiers go, I think that's where I'm kind of most disappointed. I think that the faces are okay, but I don't think they're worthy as being tiers. Honestly, I think that those should have just been included whether or not we hit those tiers or not. But I get that they still wanted to include tiers to try to hit more people that are gonna purchase it. And like I said, I still think that it would have been much better for them to include a 6-inch Giant Man. I know I've seen other people say that they want other related characters or costume designs like Yellow Jacket, the Wasp, etc. Those aren't bad ideas either, but again, they're trying to get away from that so that they don't accidentally lock away those figures from ever being released. I've backed it. I want to know if you're going to back it or what you think about it. And otherwise, if you haven't seen my 3D printed Spider-Man, check out that video right over here.